Oh, hello. Today's shir, Thursday, the 16th of Tevis, Hilchos Avodas Yom Hakippurim, Perek Aleph, Beis, and Gimel. Today's shir will be slightly different than the type of shir that I've given in the past, due to the fact that one who learns the Iyun, the Rambam, Hilchos Avodas Yom Hakippurim, sees that literally there is tremendously beautiful ha'aris on almost every single halacha. And that's what I want to accomplish today, to show you, to give you a window, to show you how, specifically in the Avodas Yom Hakippurim, there is tremendous insights and tremendous beauty in every halacha almost. So the Rambam begins. By the way, just to make a comment, as we know, there's two places in Rambam that talks at length about Yom Kippur. One is Hilchos Shvisas Asar, which are the halachas of Yom Kippur in Sefer Zmanim, and one is in Hilchos Avodas Yom Hakippurim. And there's a lot of interaction between them in the Achronim, exactly where it differentiates and why the Rambam was maidich in Hilchos Avodas Yom Hakippurim on certain things that perhaps should have been in Shvisas Asar and vice versa, which is not for now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to learn the first few halachas in today's shir, and give some short ha'aris, what I hope to say that you will feel is nice ha'aris, and 10 l'chacham v'yachkamay. They're not mine, most of them. A lot of them I'm a look at from achreinim, and we can all enjoy them. So the Rambam begins in halacha aleph, b'yom hatzoim makrivim tamid b'shachar b'tamid ben ha'abayim. On the day of the fast, which is, of course, we're talking about Yom Kippur, Yom Kippurim, in the Beis Hamikdash, they sacrificed, they brought the carbon tamid in the morning and the carbon tamid in the afternoon. Then the Rambam continues to delineate a lot of karbanos that were brought that day. We don't have to count it because in Halacha Beis, the Rambam tells us that these were 15 karbanos. So the Achreinim ask a very simple question. Why does the Rambam refer to Yom Kippur here, especially he just tells us that it's Hilchos Avodas Yom Hakippurim? Why does he call it Yom Hatzaim? L'may nafke mina that the Aveda now that we're going to be doing in the Beis Hamikdash is on Yom Hatzaim. It's l'chayda. He should have said B'Yom Hakippurim makrivim etc. Makrivim tamid b'shachar v'tamid ben rabayim. Later on, we'll see that the Rambam himself in these halachas refers to the day not as Yom Hatzaim per se, but as Yom Kippurim. So why does he begin all the halachas of Hilchos Avodas Yom Kippurim with Yom Hatzaim? So perhaps could be said a ha'ara ba'alma, a hash'ara ba'alma, that enochanami, that these dinim that the Rambam is telling us now. Of course, the source is in Masechta Yuma of the Aveda of the Kohen Gadol was specifically when there was a tzayim, specifically when there was a fast. And for example, we're all familiar with the Gemara in Meir Katan Daf Tes, that Bimei Shleim HaMelech, that was the Chanukas HaMikdash, they made Simchol Mishte Shivas Yamim, and Yom Kippur wasn't those 7 days. So the Achreinim say perhaps what the Rambam is suggesting here, that in that year or in a similar year where there will not be a Yom Hatzaim, these halachas don't apply. It's a possibility. It's a Ara Ten L'Chacham V'Yech Kamoid. In other words, since there was no Chiyuv and Tainus, they're also pater from all the rest of the Avedus Hayom. Not that these Avedus were done through Mishta V'Simcha. It was specifically Yom Hatzaim. Okay. Then the Rambam continues, Makrivim Tamid B'Shachar V'Tamid Ben Abayim. So the question is, why does the Rambam have to tell us this? Every day in the Beis Hamikdash, we brought a carbon tamid b'shachar or b'carbon ben abayim, and this was brought down in. We learned it, if you remember, recently in Hilchos Tmidim u'Musafim, that there was the din of Tmidim u'Musafim of every day, and the Tmidim u'Musafim of Yom Kippur, and so why does the Rambam have to continue this? So it's possible the Rambam is going to tell us numerous times that a lot of the avodas of Yom Kippurim in the Beis Hamikdash, even the simple avodas, were mitzvasa b'kohen gadol. In other words, what the Rambam is trying to tell us perhaps is that on Yom Kippur, even the regular avodas, even the daily avodas were nis'ala, were raised up to a different level because they were done by the kohen gadol on Yom Kippur. It's not a regular Tamid Shel Shachar v'Tamid Shel Ben Arabayim. It's a Yom Kippur dika Tamid Shel Shachar and Tamid Shel Ben Arabayim. In other words, the so to speak, the kapara of Yom Kippur is also totally in those korbanos that were done anyways daily. And on Yom Kippur they added a new dimension. Perhaps when it comes Yom Kippur, we would do well to remember that the davening or the korbanos that we say and davening on Yom Kippur, in addition to the avodah that we will say in Musaf, we should have in mind this Rambam, that even the regular korbanos, so to speak, before davening, before Haidu, are not the korbanos of a regular day, but are Yom Kippur dika korbanos. Okay. So that's and of course we know that many of the korbanos that were done in the Beis Hamikdash that day had to be owned by the kohen gadol. If we have time, we'll come back to it later. So the Rambam in Halacha Beis continues and he says, Avodas kol chamesh esrei behemes elu hakrevim b'yom zeh einoi ela b'kohen gadol b'lvad. As we just mentioned at length, the avodah of the 15 korbanos had to be done by the kohen gadol. So I want to share with you something interesting and something cute. In the original Rambams that we have, the Vilna Rambams, the regular Rambams, the Kesef Mishnah brings down. There's a Kesef Mishnah from the Beis Yosef. The Kesef Mishnah brings down b'shem Haritva, shekasav b'shem Harambam. The Kesef Mishnah brings down the name of the Ritva and the name of the Rambam, that midiraisa it's not a chayva b'kohen gadol, but that it has to be owned by the kohen gadol. But it's ksheira b'kohen hadiyat ela the mitzvah b'kohen gadol. It's an extra mitzvah b'kohen gadol. And the achronim, the commentaries, spent pages and pages trying to decipher this Kesef Mishnah, because we know clearly that this isn't the Rambam Shita, and it's pashut that it's a Toras Tzefrim. Many came to that conclusion, that instead of the Ritva b'shem Harambam, it's the Ritva b'shem Haramban. Maybe it's not so difficult because the Ritva was a Talmud of the Ramban. Interestingly enough, when the famous Frankel Rambam came out, this was one of the tens of thousands of mistakes that were systematically corrected that as the Rebbe said when he got the first kraf of Rambam Frankel Hilchas Chametz U'Matzah, he said famously that simply by the cleaning up of the printing mistakes, he took away tens of thousands of shiurim from Rosh Hashivas, tens of thousands of ha'aras, because there were simple mistakes. Here we have a beautiful example. It's not Ritva b'shem Harambam, it's a Ritva b'shem Haramban. And the Rambam actually holds that it's liikuva, most of these things. But there are certain avodas during the day that if it was done through a kohen hedyot, it's kosher. So for one example, I'll give you just one or two examples. Shchita. Shchita, even though the Rambam writes that it should be done l'chatchila through a kohen gadol, but it's kosher through a kohen hedyot. Same thing, the taking out of the kalfi from the geirolas from the kalfi, even though it should be done by the kohen gadol, but if it was done by the kohen hedyot, it's kosher. Also, there are those commentaries that say that the dishun haminayda on Yom Kippur was not done through the kohen gadol. So there are there are avodas, even though the Rambam seems to indicate that everything in the Beis Hamikdash was done that day through the Kohen Gadol. There were various avodas, more than I mentioned before, that were done, that could have been done through the Kohen Hadid. And the Achronim deal with this. And one of the possibilities that the Achronim bring down is because the Kohen Gadol was only chayiv in actual avodas, not in machshirei aveda, not in preparation aveda. And we know very, very clearly that shchita is not the aveda, shchita ksheda bezar, etc., etc. Okay, so the Rambam concludes halacha beis with a very famous halacha. We know this from the first Mishnah in Yoma, Mishnah Yoma. The Rambam says, and it's actually, there are those that want to say that this should be a separate halacha, but it's included at the end of halacha beis. The Rambam says, Hakoil asi b'koyin gadol nasui. All of these avodas that we mentioned before, the avodas of the Chamesh Esrei Behemoths and the Aktaris Akteris and the Atavis Haneris, etc., have to be done through a married kohen gadol. Shenamar b'chiper ba'ado yuv'ad beisai, beisai zu ishtay. It has to be done by a nasui, by a married kohen gadol. So there's a lot of talk on this halacha. I just want to share with you a few nuggets, a few seconds of what the Achronim, what they deal with over here. Number one, what does nasui mean? Does nasui mean actual marriage in our vernacular pashut chasana, or is edison enough? So the commentaries say that based on the Gemara Bavli and based on what the Rambam they believe to mean, that it has to actually, it's not enough that he's engaged, so to speak. He has to have actual nisuin. The sefer, there's a sefer called Mayim Chayim. I think it's from, if I'm not mistaken, it's from the Pri Chadash. The Mayim Chayim brings down that from the Yerushalmi it's mashma that kiddushin is also called Beisa. So the Minchas Chinuch brings down that if a Kohen Gadol was not married, he was a bachelor, or he had two wives. We'll talk about this in a second. So it says the Minchas Chinuch, he brings down rayos that even b'di'eved avedasei psula. This is not only a lechatchila dikidin. This is also a b'di'eved dikidin. However, the Taisis Yeshanim at the beginning of Yuma, where we said before, talk brings down this whole halacha. We'll see in a second about preparing a wife. Talks about that it's not liikuva. It's only b'di'eved. So here we have an interesting shaila that the Achronim talk about. What happens if Le'aleinu in middle of Yom Kippur the Kohen Gadol's wife dies? So the Kohen Gadol's wife dies. So of course Yom Tif. The question is whether he's allowed to be Makadosh another wife on Yom Tif, whether he could be Makadosh another his wife on Yom Tif, or this is one of the reasons why they prepared another Kohen, Maskinim Le, we'll see in a second, we're going to talk about it for a few minutes, Maskinim Le Kohen Gadol Acher, just in case, not only if he becomes tummy, but if his wife dies. So this could be a raya that the fact that they're maskinim le'kohen gadol acher, that for this purpose is that it brings a proof to the deis that say that the inyan of him being married is not only a lechatchila, but it's even also a b'diavad. So one of the achronim brings down that in Perik Hey Mehilchis Klei Hamikdash Halacha Yud, if a Kohen Gadol is married to two women, he cannot work on Yom Hatzon. He cannot do the Avodah on Yom Hatzon, not work. He can't do the Avodah on Yom Kippur. In other words, I guess concept of Yeser Kenotu. It's not the pshat that he has to have at least one wife. He cannot have more than one wife. Why? Because it says the Gemara says in Yom Daf Yud Gimel, the Chiper Ba'adoy V'ad Beisay Ba'ad Beisay V'loy Ba'ad Shnei Batim. So since the Rambam learns he learns this halacha that ain't a yochel, we see from here that two wives is likuva. So the same thing would be the one not having one wife. It's the same limud. It's the same. It comes from the same. It comes from the same place. I saw brought down that the Aruch HaShulchan in Siman Kuf Nun Zayin brings down that if a Chaz v'Shalom by a Kohen Gadol, his wife passed away on Yom Kippur, he should be Mekadesh. He should marry another woman. The question the Achronim ask on the Aruch HaShulchan is, why would we need to do that? He has another Kohen. I had another question, which again, it's a Ha'ara Ba'alma. We began our talk by saying that he has to, Edison is not enough, it has to be Nisuin. How exactly do you do that on Yom Kippur? I understand how you can do Kiddushin on Yom Kippur, Edison, but I don't know, I'm not sure how you do Nisuin on Yom Kippur, maybe Yichud. I'm not sure how to do that on how the Kohen Gadol would do that on Yom Kippur, maybe Yom Kippur at night, he's Miyachid, and therefore that's Nisuin. Okay, whatever. So, but according to the Yerushalmi that we said that Arusa is Ki'ishtay, it's not a Shaila, so then he would be considered okay. Okay, so the next halacha is, hope we're still within the time frame that we're allowed to. I need another few minutes. Believe me, I'm picking and choosing small things to say. There's so much to say just on these Rambams. So the Rambam in Halacha Gimel says, Shivas Yamim Kaidum Yom Kippurim Mafrishin Kohen Gadol Mi Beisai Lilishkasei Shiva Migdash. So the question is, what does it mean Mafrishin? Who's Mafrish? He's Mafrish. Somebody else? The Shatchanim are Mafrish. I mean, the police are Mafrish. What's going on over here? So the Farshim say that Mafrishim, that there has to be an active hafrasha. It's a chayvus bezdin. It's not enough that he sends an email saying, "Okay, it's Erev Yom Kippur. I have gone to my place. We'll discuss in a minute where the place is. I have gone to my place." That's not enough. The Rambam says mafrishim. It has to be a gather of hafrasha. Bezdin has to come, and there's a whole procedure. Some people say that the melech would come, and some people say that all the kohanim would come, and all the chshuvim would come, and they would make a ceremony, and they would escort him from his house to lishkasei shebahar habayis. So in other words, the gather has to be over here of not just atzmai, but also mafrishim. For that, they would prepare his place and they would accompany him, the mishpacha of Malchei Yisrael, and then mishpacha of Malchei Beis David, and then they would give him a lot of kavod. So the commentaries ask an interesting question: where does he have to be mafresh to? Does it have to be anywhere? In other words, he has to be mafresh. It says mafrishinais. It doesn't say mafrishinais and mibase. So the Rambam said lishkasei should be migdash. The question is that just a fact that's what happened, or that's a halacha that it has to be? So the Sfas Emes says, I'm sorry, excuse me, no, that's something else. So the Taisus in Yuma says that no, it can't be anywhere. It has to be dafka harabais, but Lishkase b'harabayis is not Meikar Adin. It has to be in Harabayis somewhere, says Taisus. But it doesn't have to be in his official office. And therefore, there's an interesting question. What happens if the Kohen Gadol actually lived in an apartment in Harabayis, if he still needed to be mafresh, if that was, he had to go somewhere else, or it's enough that he was b'toich beisai, that nobody, but he shouldn't be with his wife. In other words, instead of him leaving the house, his wife leaves. I would venture to say, based on what we said before, my frish and I say that it has to be to a second place, but the Achronim talk about this as well. What's interesting is that he has to be there for 7 days, and the question is, if the Sfas Emes wouldn't ask this question, I'm not sure that I would ask it, but he says the question is, can he leave his apartment? Can he leave this place for 7 days, or is he locked up like a prisoner for 7 days in his lishka shebahar habayis? So the Sfas Emes says in the beginning of Yuma that it's like sukkah. It's like sukkah, just like a sukkah. Well, you don't say that he has to live. He's not allowed to leave the sukkah. Teishu came to do. In other words, we say that the shivas yamim. I guess he makes a shtickle hekesh between the shivas yamim of a sukkah, the shivas yamim of Yom Kippur. he says that for the next 7 days, his house is now Lishkase Shabarabayas. But of course, he could leave if he needs to leave. He needs to go, he needs to go somewhere, etc., etc. So, yeah. So again, the Rambam learns that Shiva Yom Kippurim Mafrishim Kohen Gadol Lishkase Shebes Hamikdash, and then it says interesting umaskinin loy Kohen Gadol acher. What does it mean maskinin loy? Maskinim Kohen Gadol. What does that have to do with him? The fact that there's going to be a second Kohen Gadol has nothing to do with him. It's not maskinim loy ish acheres. The ish acheres is taka loy. What does the Rambam write? Maskinim loy Kohen Gadol acher. It's a big problem with the Mefarshim talk about. So there are those that say a beautiful teretz, maybe it's a chassidish teretz, maybe it's a psychological teretz. Maskinim loy, the fact that he knows that there's a second Kohen Gadol in the wings, he's going to be much more careful. He's going to be much more careful that he doesn't get tummy. He's going to be much more careful that he doesn't do anything wrong. So the haskana, the maskinim is light, is avurai, is for thing. There's another whole interesting diuk. Again, it's amazing how much there is in Hilchas Avodas Yom Hakippurim. The Minchas Chinuch writes that there's a question: how exactly does he become a Kohen Gadol? Because one of the ways is to put on the begadim, but he can't put on the begadim because he's not the Kohen Gadol yet. Kohen Gadol becomes a Kohen Gadol when he puts on the begadim. So what do you mean maskinim loy Kohen Gadol acher? Maybe the lashon should have been I guess the Minchas Chinuch kasha is maskinim loy Kohen acher roy li is Kohen Gadol. It's whatever. So I'm not sure if it's in Minchas Chinuch or somebody else says that this is a special dispensation, a special heter on Yom Kippur. That because it's Yom Kippur and it's so chashuv, it's so important to have a Kohen Gadol. Matake, he becomes the hazmana itself that this person is going to be the Kohen Gadol, even without ribi begadim, he becomes a Kohen Gadol. Okay. Okay. Also, this means as adminu, you have to have everything. Finally, one final order. I see we're running very late. Yom Kippur will be mechaper. So, but I have to say this because we have a crowd, Baruch Hashem, who's in Baruch Hashem. You'll see in a second why I'm saying this. The halacha, the Gemara says, be made by Sheni. There was a problem with the minim, and they had to be mashbia the Kohen Gadol. So there's a big to-do over here. Number one, why are they called minim? They should be called apikursum. If you look at the Rambam Milchus Tshuva, you'll see that the gather over here is not minim, but it's more the tztukim or more apikursum. But that's for a long time. I want to just, they have a klutz kasha, like they say. They say, if he's a tzvaiki, so what's helped Hashua? He's came from a yid. He's not a maimin. So what does the shvua help over here? So I saw a beautiful answer. The answer is al derech what it says in the Gemara Nida. Mashbi ma'aseh tzadik valti rasha. That the shvua itself is not so much a shvua that we tell the Kohen Gadol, we make the Kohen Gadol promise. The shvua is, let's say, use chassidish l'shenis. They don't use this. I'll use it. Chassidish l'shenis. They masbia him. They give him power. They empower him that he should be able to withstand any temptations of being a tzduki or mashbia ma'aseh. They want to say bal karcha shalei yishana. In other words, that they're mashbia him that he shouldn't even though maybe he has inclinations, he shouldn't do. But the chassidish pshat is mashbia meloshem masbia.